The lesson topic for this video is review of GCF and factoring when A equals 1. So first of all, let's remember that a GCF is a greatest common factor. All right, now a greatest common factor means that we are going to try to take the greatest, meaning largest or biggest, factor that's common between all terms, every single term, and we're going to factor it out, and it's kind of like the opposite of distributing. So in this first example, remember that sometimes the GCF is just a number. If you look here, 12x plus 6, we want to factor out, in this case, a numerical GCF, and that is 6, because the largest number I can divide both 12 and 6 by is 6. Note that 2 and 3 are also common factors, but they're not the greatest. So I'm going to take 6 and put it here, and then if I started with 2 terms, I need to end in the parentheses with 2 terms, and that addition sign will stay there. So if I take 12 and divide by 6, I get 2, so I have 2x left here. And then if I take a 6 and I factor out a 6, be careful here, a lot of people want to put 0 here or nothing, but there's actually going to be a 1 there. Because what you want to remember is that if you were to redistribute the 6 back into the parentheses, you need to arrive back at where you started. So if I distributed 6 times 2x, that's 12x, and 6 times 1 is 6, so we'd have plus 6. We have gotten back to where we started. Okay, so you don't have to do this, it's just to remind you that what you get in your factored answer needs to be, if distributed, back to the original problem. All right, so the second example here, negative 2x squared minus 6. The negative is always going to be, you're always going to want to factor out if there's a negative at the front term, okay, if it's written in standard form. So we definitely want to factor out a negative, and then we also want to factor out the greatest number possible, which is 2. When I factor out the negative 2, right here, that negative 2 will be factored out. We're left with x squared, or 1x squared. That minus sign right there will actually become a plus sign because we're factoring that negative sign out. You can think of it as taking negative 6 and dividing it by negative 2. Well, a negative divided by negative is positive, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then the last one over here on the right, 3x squared plus 21x plus 36. Again, notice we cannot factor out a variable here because we have x squared here and x here, but no x's here. So we can just factor out a numerical value, and again, that number is 3. Every single one of these terms, 3, or coefficients, 3, 21, and 36, are divisible by 3. If I take that 3 out of that first term, divide by 3, I'm left with 1x squared, or just x squared. The plus sign needs to be brought down there. 21 divided by 3 is 7, so we're left with 7x. And then 36 divided by 3 is 12, so then plus 12. Okay, so sometimes the GCF is a variable. So if you look at the first one, x squared plus 4x, we can factor an x out of both of those terms. Because remember, x squared means x times x, right? So I can factor one of those out. So I'm going to factor out an x. If I factor out one of these x's, that's gone, and I factor out this x, that's gone. What am I left with? Well, I'm left with x, and the plus, and this 4 right here. So if I factor out an x, I'm left with x times x plus 4. The next one, I have x to the 5th plus 3x squared. So again, this time, the variable factor I can take out is x squared. And again, if you think about x to the 5th as being x times x times x times x times x, okay, that's this x to the 5th, and 3x squared is 3 times x, we can factor out anything that's common. So this x is common, and this x is common, and that's all I can factor out. So I can factor out the 2x's, which is not 2x, it's x times x, so x squared. And then what are we left with? Well, notice we're left with x times x times x, which is x to the 3rd, plus over here, I'm left with a 3. So that is factored, or the GCF has been factored out. And sometimes the GCF is a number and a variable. So 3x squared plus 9x. We can factor out a 3 because both of our terms have a numerical coefficient that is divisible by 3. So I'm going to factor out a 3. And then I have an x squared and an x. So I can factor an x out of both of those. So I'm going to factor out an x. Again, if I start with 2 terms, I need to end up with 2 terms in the parentheses. So if I factored out this 3, and I factored out one of these x's, I'm left with an x. And then if I factor this, take this 9 here, and I factor out a 3, well, that will give us 9 divided by 3 is 3. So I need a 3 here. And I need my plus sign in between, of course. And then I've factored this x out, so I don't need to put any more x's here. So here is our factored form there. And then 4x to the 4th plus 16x squared plus 8x. Okay, so first of all, again, I'm going to look for a numerical GCF. Okay, we've got a 4 here and a 16 here, which is positive, and we've got a positive 8. Each of those is divisible by 4. So I'm going to take that 4 out in the front. Then I want to look at my variable term. So I have x to the 4th, which is x times x times x times x. And I have x squared, which is x times x. And then I have an x, which is just x. Now what could I factor out of every single one of those terms? Well, I can factor out an x. If I start with 3 terms, I end with 3 terms. Again, if you want to put those, like the plus sign there and the plus sign in there, again, I'm just bringing these pluses down to my answer. If I factor the 4 out, and then I factor x to the 4th, I factor out an x from that, I'm left with x to the 3rd. If I take 16, factor out a 4, I'm left with 4. And then if I take x squared and factor out an x, I'm left with an x right here as well. And then lastly, if I have 8 and I factor out a 4, I'm left with 2 right here. And if I have an x and I factored that x out, I have no x's here. Another part of this review is remembering how to factor a trinomial in standard form when a equals 1. And again, that a equals 1 is this number out in front of x squared. The coefficient is 1. All right, to do this, what we talked about is taking this c term right here and bringing it out to here, and this is how I showed it in class. And I said, okay, what are all my factors of 8? Well, 1 times 8 is 8, and 2 times 4 is 8. And now I ask the question, which of these 2 factored situations will add up to this middle term c? So I need to add up to 6. Well, the 2 numbers that add up to 6 are 2 and 4. So 2 and 4 are what we're going to use to factor this trinomial. So we're going to put the parentheses down, and we know that x times x gives us this x squared right here. And then we know we need to put the plus 2 and the plus 4 from right here into our parentheses, and this is factored. Now if you wanted to double check that this is right, all you would need to do is FOIL this and make sure that you arrive back at your original trinomial. The next one, we need negative 12 out here. The factors of negative 12 are negative 1 times 12, negative 2 times 6, and negative 3 times 4. I could also move that negative around if I need to. So we need to find out which of those adds up to negative 4. Well, that doesn't. And this is close, right? This adds up to positive 4, and we need a negative 4, which means that we need to switch the negative to a positive and the positive to a negative. And now those two will add up to negative 4. I'm going to put my parentheses down. X times x gives us the x squared right there, and then we need the plus 2 and the minus 6 from right here. This is our factored answer, and again, we could FOIL it to make sure that we get our original problem. Go ahead and try this next one on your own. Pause the video, give it a try, check to see how you did. Okay, so 12 is the number that we want to write out here. 12 is 1 times 12, or 2 times 6, or 3 times 4. But this time we want our answer to add up to negative 7. Well, that's a bit of a problem since none of these factors over here have negatives in them. But if you think about 3 plus 4 adds up to positive 7, and we need negative 7, what we can do is we can make both of these negative. Because negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. So then we have our factors. X times x is x squared, and then we need minus 3 and minus 4. Okay, so now all together, what we need to do is we need to factor completely. So the first thing we want to do when we factor is we want to take out our GCF. So we've been practicing that. I'm going to go ahead and factor a 4 out because each of these is divisible by 4. And notice there's no x that I can factor out because 36 does not have an x variable with it. All right, so factor out a 4. I'm left with x squared plus 6x plus 9. Okay, I factored a 4 out of each of these terms, and go back through that if you need to go through that slower. Now, what I need to do next is I need to take this trinomial and factor it. It's got a leading coefficient of 1, so we use our method we've been talking about on the previous screen where we take 9 off to the side. 1 times 9 is 9, and 3 times 3 is 9. Which one of those will help me get positive 6? Well, 3 plus 3. So I'm going to keep my 4 out here, and now I'm going to write my parentheses. I'm going to put x times x, which gives me x squared, and then the plus 3 and the plus 3, and this is our factored form. Try this other one here off to the side and check back to see how you did. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is factor out, in this case, negative 3. I'm going to factor out a negative 3. When I do so, I get x squared minus 1x. Did you remember that when you take a negative out, this positive, if I take a negative out, this will become negative here. And then same thing here, negative 2. Because positive 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. Now, I'm going to go off to the side and look for values that are factors of negative 2, this term right here. And that will be 1 times negative 2. And that does, in fact, add up to the negative 1. That's the coefficient of x. This adds up to negative 1. So, I write my negative 3, my 2 sets of parentheses, x times x. I'm going to put a plus 1 and a minus 2.